Welcome, anatomy students, to my very first screencast, and I hope you find this lecture helpful. And feel free to stop it at any time or watch it as many times as you'd like. I will be able to write on the screen, and I can pause when I need to go get a drink of water or something like that. So feel free, please make some comments at the end. Tell me what I could do to improve, okay? Thanks. Here we go. All right, so we got three types of muscle tissue. You can see from this diagram here, cartoon drawings, shows you the three types of muscle tissues and their general locations. We're going to talk about each one of these in detail, and I'll give you some information about each one of these. Our three types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. It's a lot less to learn than, for example, the epithelial tissues or the connective tissues. So we will get started. Here we go. Skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle, under voluntary control. What exactly does that mean? That means that it does take the nervous system, in order to make it move or contract. Muscles can do only one thing, and that is to pull or shorten. And we'll learn a lot more about the physiology of muscle contraction when we do the muscular system in more detail. This is just a preview of the muscles, and I'm noticing down here that this is actually the wrong picture. This picture is not muscular tissue because it has intercalated discs. This is actually cardiac, so my bad. And I'm just going to keep going, so I'm sure you'll see this picture again. Hopefully I don't have a bunch more mistakes. This picture up here, though, is correct. It is skeletal muscle, and it does very clearly show striations, those striped band patterns. Another characteristic of skeletal muscle is that it's multinucleate, which means it has multiple nuclei per cell, and we'll talk about that again in just a second. First of all, where do we find skeletal muscle? So if I put up my whiteboard setting here and I clear this slide off, where do we find skeletal muscle? Location. Okay, locations of skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle we're going to find connected to bones. There are a few examples of skeletal muscle that's not connected to bones, but the vast majority of it is going to be connected to bones. Its function or functions are responsible for gross body movement. Now, gross body movement, that doesn't mean like, ooh, gross, doing gross stuff. It means overall body movement. So the overall movement of the body. And locomotion, which means moving around. So not just moving your arms and your legs, but also physically getting up and walking around. Those are the functions of the skeletal muscle. And we want to go on. Okay, so here I gave you a diagram of what we're talking about. It shows here a bone, and it shows how skeletal muscle, this is a skeletal muscle here, is connected to bone through a tendon. And the connection is through something called an aponeurosis. And the muscle fibers actually really literally grow into tendon, and then the tendon grows and connects to the periosteum of the bone. So we talked in class about how damaging it is when you have a muscle that pulls off of the bone, and how a lot of times you have to have surgery to fix that, repair it if it's a complete complete tear. So because that tendon is going to be connective tissue, doesn't have a blood supply, and so it's going to be very, very slow to heal. I like this diagram because it shows you the overall structure of a muscle, and then it breaks it down to literally the muscle cell level, or which we call muscle fibers, which are individual muscle cells. So you can see that muscles have several layers of organization, and as we go through, again, this is just to show you the scale. We're going to be looking at this level here, looking at individual muscle fibers, both from a view from the side and also a transverse view, just like this image is showing you the cutting through the ends of the muscles. This is a diagram of individual muscle cells. So this would be here one muscle fiber. Okay, this would be one muscle fiber, so one muscle cell, and cut in half. And so you're seeing all of these contractile units called the myofibrils. And here's an organelle that you should be familiar with, the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. And this gives you a hint of how much energy muscle cells use because they have so many mitochondria. They need lots of sugar because they have a high energy requirement. It takes a lot of energy in the form of ATP to contract those muscles and those myofibrils, those contractile units. It's because of the organization of these the sarcomeres and the myofibrils, the actins and the myosins. These are proteins that are responsible for contraction, and it's because of how they're arranged that gives us one of the characteristic features of skeletal muscle, which are the striations, and we'll see that in the next picture. So here, this is a real high power image. I don't have what this is written down, but I want to say this is got to be, I know when we look in class, a lot of times we're looking at 400 power. But this is way beyond that. This has probably an oil immersion lens, and so I would assume that this is probably 1,000 magnification, factor of 1,000 magnification. And this is showing you very, very close up the striations. So what they've done is they've taken this square here and magnified it even more. We'd be lucky if we could see this level of magnification, but you go to this level and we don't even have microscopes in class that'll show us that. Here you can see, though, what the breakdown of the different bands are and why we see these striations, this banding cross-striping pattern. It has to do with the arrangement of the actin and the myosin in the sarcomeres that are responsible for contraction of a muscle cell. Here is another picture showing you the nuclei of the cell. Skeletal muscle is really, really long. The cells can be really long. They can be over a foot in length, which is an amazing little fact. They're very long and slender cells. I misspelled that. Oops. So they're very long and skinny. And they are multinucleate. These are the cigar-shaped nuclei that we see. Again, you see the beautiful cross striations, all very, very organized actin and myosin filaments. And one of the other characteristics of skeletal muscle is that they do not have the ability to divide. The equipment inside the cell will reproduce, and each individual muscle fiber can grow in size, but that's not because of cell division. It's because of an increase in the number of contractile units or sarcomeres inside of the cell. So there are cells outside of the muscle cells called satellite cells. Okay, and those satellite cells can divide, and that's how you repair your muscle cells. The number of muscle cells that you have is genetically determined. And so how do you bulk up? Well, by exercise and by pushing your muscles and making them, sending signals that you need more muscle fibers, or more sarcomeres. Your muscle fibers each will get larger, but your muscles don't grow because of an increase in muscle cells themselves. Here's another picture from another website, Lumen, showing you the nucleus of each muscle fiber, the striations, the banding pattern, and then this is giving you some vocabulary that you're going to learn. Don't worry about it now, but when we learn the structure of a gross muscle, the exterior of a muscle, all the different parts. So endo, epi, and peri are very, very common prefixes that you have seen as we've started doing our vocabulary. So endo, inside, inner, epi, on top of. Peri means around. Skeletal muscle. This is a farther away view, okay, a lower power view, and can't see the striations as well, so maybe not the best picture. Nice close-up view again. You can see the darkly staining nuclei here and the striations. You see, can't really tell where one cell ends and the next one begins. I put this picture in because it shows and leads me to talk about one of the characteristics of skeletal muscle is that it's under voluntary control, which means that you think about contracting skeletal muscles. It doesn't just contract on its own. And skeletal muscle is told when to contract by stimulation from the nervous system. And you will see here an axon of a nerve. And then this is going to be the end of the nerve where it would release neurotransmitters or chemicals, which would then spread around the outside of the muscle cell, causing the muscle cell to become stimulated and contract. So we're going to learn a lot more about this, but I think this is just an absolutely amazing slide showing you an actual nerve ending and the motor end plate, the area where the nerve would be stimulating the muscle cell. So pretty cool. This is a nice diagram showing the outside of some sarcolemmas and sarcomeres, and lots of mitochondria, so the actual insides of a muscle cell. Just so you know that this is they call it the sarcolemma instead of the plasma lemma. This is the membrane on the outside of the cell. And you see there's so much intercellular equipment, space devoted to the contraction that the nucleus gets squished over here right against the end. And so instead of having normal endoplasmic reticulum in muscle cells, it's called sarcoplasmic reticulum, just a separate little name. Same basic function, just moving ions around, and you see how it surrounds all of these contractile units to bring ions in so that it can contract. This is a cross-section view of skeletal muscle, and I put it here in black and white, and then I really nicely labeled, and then an actual color diagram. So this would be not the section where it's a cross-section, so you're looking down the ends of the skeletal muscles instead of looking at the sides. So you can't see the striations, but here you can see the nuclei and how they're pushed around to the edges and how there's so many nuclei per cell. All right, took a little break there, and here we are back to smooth muscle. Okay, smooth muscle under involuntary control. That means that you don't have to think about it contracting. And when you find out about all the important stuff that the smooth muscle does, you're going to be like, oh, thank goodness, I can barely remember to do my homework, let alone think about moving food through my gut and contracting my blood vessels and so on. So we find smooth muscle, locations of smooth muscle. Let's see, locations. Where do we find it? Okay, we find smooth muscle in lots of different places. We find it in the walls of our visceral organs. Remember, our viscera are basically our guts, and so we're going to find smooth muscle in our stomachs, throughout our digestive tract, through a lot of our respiratory organs, the trachea and the bronchioles and things like that. We're going to find it in our reproductive tract. We're going to find it in our urinary tract, lots of places. We're also going to find it in the walls of blood vessels. Okay. Lots of places, breathing. I'm going to put breathing tubes. Won't be a good answer on your test, but we'll say trachea, bronchi, bronchioles. leading all the way down. So when you have an asthma attack, you're going to have involuntary contractions of the muscles in there, which is going to narrow up your breathing tubes and make it harder to breathe. That's why you take the medications that will help to vasodilate and dilate all those breathing tubes so that you can breathe when you're having an asthma attack. Okay, that was our locations. Functions. Okay, functions. Depending upon where our smooth muscles are located, they have different jobs to do. If it's in a blood vessel, for example, okay, it's going to provide elasticity. Elasticity, that means that when your heart contracts and the blood vessels stretch out very rapidly from the increase in pressure, for example, in the aorta, they need to be able to snap back into shape, and the smooth muscle helps with that. Contractility. That means they have the job of being able to contract. We're going to see this through our digestive tract. As we move food through our digestive tract, we have waves of muscular contraction that push the food through from mouth to anus. Once you swallow it, it's going to move on through without any thought on your part as it goes down the esophagus and into the stomach. You also have contractility in the uterus, for example. Oh, sorry, that's messy. Uterus. When a woman goes into labor, it's going to push the baby on out. And actually, a woman can deliver a child while unconscious. There have been women who've been in, have lost consciousness, and the body still continues to contract. And then we have support. Okay, there is some support provided by supporting internal organs and things like that with smooth muscle. Okay, moving on. No striations. Okay, no striations to our smooth muscle. The actin and the myosin is actually organized differently than in skeletal muscle, and so that's why we don't see the striations. Multinucleate, that's actually incorrect. Okay, we say they are uninucleate. Okay, they have one cigar-shaped nucleus per cell. And then the cells are spindle-shaped, which means that they have this kind of tapered end and thicker in the middle. So tapered end. And I'm still getting better at drawing here on the iPad. But here we have, so we see no striations, long spindle-shaped cells, one nucleus per cell. Smooth muscle cells are able to divide. Okay, they can divide, unlike skeletal muscle cells. So therefore, they are capable of regeneration. That means they can repair themselves. So when smooth muscle is damaged, it can repair itself. Here's a little diagram, a drawing of the smooth muscle. If you want to add a drawing into your notebook, you have some spindle-shaped cells that we're looking at from the side. So these ones here we would be looking at from the side. And then here, this would be looking at a cross-section, looking down the length of the muscle cell. An actual picture from a microscope drawing, and you can literally see how the tapering on the edge of the muscle fibers looks. Okay. This one is interesting because it does show the collagen fibers and the spindle-shaped cells, and so you see that there are more than just muscle cells in muscles. You have other tissues found or I'm sorry, not other tissues. There's connective tissue here because you have a collagen fiber, but that adds to elasticity and helps the muscle maintain its shape. And then another picture showing you nuclei and some smooth muscle fibers. A little bit less definition on this picture than on the other ones. And again, less definition. It's a lower powered picture. This picture is showing you two different views of a smooth muscle. And it's interesting, something like the stomach, for example. In your stomach, you have 3 layers of muscles. You have some muscle that runs longitudinally, this direction. Some muscle that actually, this is a cross-section of muscle. And then you also have muscle that runs at an angle so that you can have complete mixing of food with your digestive juices inside of your stomach. So this shows you that in one organ, in one structure, and this would be some, going back to connective tissue, this would be some probably areolar connective tissue, and on the outside it looks like maybe some squamous epithelium. So this is from the outside of an organ looking in. And I know this is on that JDoc HistoWeb website. Do you remember that? JDoc HistoWeb. And I don't remember what this was a picture of exactly, but I know it's from that website because it's here. So you can look that up and see what it was. Okay, and cardiac muscle, moving on, cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle, going to look more like skeletal muscle. Big difference here, it's under involuntary control. That means that your nervous system doesn't have to tell you don't have to tell your heart to beat. It's going to beat all on its own. Now, there are things you can do to relax yourself, which then your nervous system will slow your heart rate down. But your heart has an internal pacemaker. And these are going to be cells that basically regulate the rate of the heart muscle contractions. And this will be altered by the nervous system when you're exercising, for example, and there's a higher demand for oxygen in your muscle cells, in your skeletal muscle cells, and therefore your heart will beat faster to move blood flow to your muscles at an increased rate, therefore bringing sugar and oxygen. But people who need to get pacemakers installed into their heart, that's because these internal pacemaker cells have stopped working correctly, and so your heart's misfiring almost, and it's not beating with the correct beat. Cardiac muscle cells have striations, so we're back to that actin and myosin organization like a skeletal muscle. Many of them are multinucleate, but most only have one nucleus. And another cool thing about cardiac muscle that makes it different is that the cells are branched, which means that one cell can kind of fork off and connect with another cell, which may fork off. And the gentleman on Khan Academy drew the picture so much better than I am, but there we go. Oh, that's so bad. So we have striated cells, striations, branching fibers. I'm going to show you a better picture here, but here, I'll finish doodling. Typically one nucleus per cell. There are areas here that we're going to pay special attention to where the cells get really close up next to each other, and they form what's called an interconnected network. Well, it's not called an interconnected network, but it forms an interconnected network of cells because it's really important in cardiac muscle that the muscle fibers contract in a coordinated way so that your heart will beat and actually adequately move blood around. These interconnections here that I drew here in between each of the cells, so if there's another cell there, not every cardiac muscle cell is branched, but these are called intercalated discs. INTERCALATED, intercalated discs. And it's going off the edge there, intercalated discs. And these are really, really important and characteristic of cardiac muscle, as we're going to see here. So this was the picture that I accidentally put up at the front of the presentation, and this is showing you the branching patterns of the cells. So you can see a cell here that's branched, another cell here that's branched. You can clearly see the striations. You can see the nuclei, and then you can see these areas where the cells join to each other, these intercalated discs. And intercalated discs are actually areas where the cells are literally cemented and locked to each other by something called a desmosome. And desmosome, some is going to be a root that you're going to see over and over again. There's an organelle called a peroxisome. We'll talk about the somatic nervous system. Some means body. And then desmos means ligament. So if you remember on our connective tissue, ligaments are straps that connect bones to bones. Well, here, desmosomes are going to be areas where the cells are actually joined to each other. And there's some other material in there, like an intercellular cement and something else called a gap junction. Long story short, the purpose of these intercalated discs are to allow really good communication between one cardiac muscle cell and another cardiac muscle cell so that you have continuous muscular contraction in a very coordinated way, because the heart, again, has to beat in a very organized fashion in order to circulate blood around your body. So here, this is actually a student diagram of cardiac muscle cells, and I think this is a nice diagram. My only complaint would be it's missing something. What is it missing, you guys? What is it missing? Yes, striations. I'd like to see some more striations in there throughout. They're not showing the striations, and of course you would draw them a lot better than that, I know. This is showing also that we've got blood vessels here, collagen, a network of collagen in between the muscle cells. And if you're overweight, even if you're not overweight, but more fat on your body that you have, you're going to have fat on your heart as well. And when we do our heart dissections and we do our sheep hearts, you'll see there's lots of fat on the outside of the heart. So you'll actually cut some of that off. But you don't want to have a lot of fat on your heart, right? It will inhibit its ability to contract. So, other characteristics of heart muscles. So, obviously, locations and functions. Okay, locations. Where do we have cardiac muscle? Only one place, and that's your heart. Easy to remember, right? Cardiac, cardio, heart. Okay, function. Hopefully you understand why you have a heart. It's not to love each other. That's more kind of like your brain. But your the functions of the heart is to move blood. It acts like a huge pump. And when you think about it, this muscle, you know how you exercise and you get tired and your muscles you feel the burn? Well, your cardiac muscle has to pump 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. How many years are you going to live? 70, 80 years? Constantly. Just beat after beat after beat. At rest, you're at about 70 beats per minute. And that can vary depending upon what kind of shape you're in, and if you're relaxed or if you're real anxious, or how many Starbucks coffees you've had, like me. But that's a lot of beating. It's millions and millions of times in your lifetime. So, and when it stops, what happens? Well, when your heart stops beating and you stop circulating blood flow to your brain, you die. So let's take care of our hearts, huh? The cardiac muscle, it has a limited ability to repair itself. And so one of the things that they can look at on somebody's heart is if they have an area of heart muscle that has become damaged because of a reduced blood flow, then it will actually form scar tissue. And that is going to result in a loss of pumping function or heart function. So you want to take care of your heart. There are large blood vessels that nourish the heart muscle, and you want to make sure that they're not getting all clogged up with deposits of cholesterol and such, plaque buildup, so that you don't have a myocardial infarction, an MI, myocardial infarction, which is basically a heart attack. If you cut off the blood flow to this muscle, it's muscle cells. It needs to be nourished with nutrients and oxygen. And if you don't do that, then it's going to stop contracting and therefore stop sending blood to your brain. And again, you die. So that's what a heart attack's all about. Here we have another diagram showing the branching muscle fibers and the intercalated discs. Another diagram, you see the nuclei, striations. How are you going to know when you see striations that you're not looking at skeletal muscle? You're going to know because you're going to see these dark areas there. This one, I don't see a lot of branching that's really obvious, but I see these dark lines, and those are my intercalated discs, so that's my clue that I'm looking at a cardiac muscle. This one's a lot clearer. What landmarks do we see? This one does look like it's more of a branched cell, and then you see these desmosomes, these intercalated discs. Nucleus here, nucleus, nucleus. This is actually some fat right here. Okay. And again, that's the same picture, just a different stain. So I kind of think it's pretty cool. You can see how different stains will bring out different structures. And this one makes the appearance of the fat cells a little bit more obvious. So there's a little bit of a review of our connective tissue because you can see the honeycomb shape of the fat cells. Okay, so there, another view. And this diagram, this is a drawing, and see if you can quiz yourself and figure out what kind of muscle tissue do we have in slide 1, slide 2, and slide 3. And then can you identify a bunch of those little diagram structures here over on the right-hand side that are numbered up to 10. If you put that in your notes, then I will know that you've watched this whole presentation to the very end. I'm at 32 minutes and 25 seconds, and that's about how long I would lecture in class. The benefit is when you watch this, you can turn me off. Can't do that in class. See if you can come up with some answers for what all these little structures are, and then we can have you share your answers with us in class, and then I'll know you watched to the bitter end. So please leave me some comments. Let me know what I could do differently. Let me know if the music playing in the background was too distracting. It kind of helps me to stay on focus, and I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you in class. Bye-bye.